normally we do this forum with Kent as kind of something where we all three participate in a group of coins. Many of you have already attended these, so you know how it goes. But Mike and I decided we'd do it a little bit differently this time. Mike obviously had his topic, and so I took it upon myself to pick my own coin within my area, which is the Cobb period. And I came across, in fact, I was going to do something totally different, but then I came across this piece that I always wondered about. I even offered one in our auction, sold one in our auctions, and I was never very satisfied with any explanation I was ever given as to whether this was fake or genuine, old, new, what it was exactly. So I started doing the research, and you'll see what I've come up with. This basically goes back 150 years, and as soon as you see the picture, a lot of you will be familiar with it, and a lot of you have opinions about it. And a lot of you, like me, just were never really sure, but anything that goes back that far must have some legitimacy to it. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. This is what we're talking about. And actually, I have an example that I will pass around, and take your time looking at it. It's something that's been referred to a lot as a peso de minas, or terms along those lines, minas referring to mines. This is the example that we had in our auction in April of 2011. It seems that the design is always the same, and the ones that you see that come up are unifaced, like you see here, and the weight is 34.5 grams, or around that. Can you go to the next slide, please, HT? So what I did is I put together a chart of not all, but almost all of the references where this has appeared. And as you can see, it goes all the way back to 1854 reference that was a rather large reference on a lot of different areas and by a lot of different authors and experts in the fields. And the particular expert in the field for coins was, I believe it was Manuel Orozco Iberra. And what I've done here is gone through all of the different references and put what each one said about this piece. And as you can see, if you can read from a distance, I know it's pretty small, I'm sorry. In that first reference, he went on at length about how the mines had these special tokens for the miners because the mines were too far away from the mint, and the miners needed some way to exchange, do their transactions without coins. And it was actually condoned by the crown. The quinto had not been paid, but the assumption was that eventually the miners were going to go to Mexico, get their coins made, and everything would be fine. There was a point in which these pieces were recalled, but the main thing was that they were marked with a stamp so that everyone would know that these are not official coins and they could not circulate outside the mining community. So this is where it was introduced, this particular piece, as a weight of silver, and my translation's not great, but of those who served in the mines for their transactions. Then we go through, you can see there's doubt even as soon as 1866 when another researcher in another large reference calls them very strange, whose significance we do not know. So the pieces were around then, but there was already some doubt. But then we go through several major collections, and I'm also omitting, I couldn't find to my satisfaction, but I believe there was one in Saalbach in Schulman in 1911, but I couldn't find that to confirm. I think there was a 1926 Schulman auction that had one too. The point is that throughout the late 1800s and the early 1900s, major collections had these pieces and considered them to be genuine. And you'll get to something like Medina, where he actually quotes some of the older references, and there was no problem. Then we get to 1929 in Gutag, where it says this piece is in a number of collections, but no one seems to know its origins. We're going back to the doubt. When we get to Prado, which is the biggest thing that we'll study in this lecture, he shows it and explains a lot of the stuff that we have before, but then he puts it on a plate of other pieces and calls all of those pieces doubtful and bogus pieces. So he's getting pretty strong on that statement. We go through Daci, Emburcio, and Iriarte. They're all they're very non-committal on their assessment of authenticity. The biggest one, we go through Calbato, but then the biggest condemnation is when we get to 1981 with Grove's Coins of Mexico, where he says outright, made to defraud collectors. And at that point, the doubt is quite strong, and even so, we still have two modern references, Caillon and Calicot, which both treat it as legitimate. At least Calicot says that false coins exist, fakes exist. I'm going to examine not all of these, but the major ones, so you can see where we're coming from on all this, and then I'll make some further commentary. HT, next slide, please. So this is the first one. This is the fish that crawled out of the swamp, if you will. This is where the very first rubbing of the coin or the piece came to light, and this was the Diccionario Universal that I was mentioning that had the article by Orozco Iberra. And I've already talked about exactly what he says there, but I might point out also some important text here. Note, of course, he describes the whole coin. It's an octagon, a regular octagon, with a cross with equal arms in the center, and on the right, and then in the, I guess the other side, 1611, and below the M with the O encima above it, and the word REI. I mean, perfectly describes the piece that we're looking at. But here's the catch. He says, en la otra cara, on the other face, the other side, no tiene más de una cruz. So he's saying that there is a cross on the other side. Nothing more than a cross, but there is a design on the other side. He's not saying that it's uniface. That's a key. But then he says it's a weight of silver, and as I quoted before, it was used in the mines and for their transactions. And he also says in previous times they carried the mark of R, which was what I was saying. That was the official way that you knew it was just a mine piece. It wasn't a coin to be circulated. And then he says that this stands for the term resgate, which I haven't been able to come up with a real good translation for, but a token or some kind of provisional money, again, just for the mines. Now, also, you notice that he states the weight is that of a 10 reales. And if you do the math, 34.5 grams is what would be a 10 reales if such a coin existed. He also goes on to say that it was found in a street in Mexico City, and actual historical background that seems to make sense. What I didn't put there is the lengthy footnote that takes 3 pages, but is basically a translation or transliteration of a contemporary document talking about resgate and the existence of these things. So I'm convinced that there was such a thing as a mine token. The question is that what this is? Next slide, please. I'm going to gloss through these quickly because these are some of the intermediate collections that I mentioned. They're very non-committal. They refer to the previous references about the coins or the pieces and basically make it sound like there's no problem, but we don't know what it is in a nutshell. And Gutag, as I said before, says this piece is in a number of collections, but no one seems to know its origin. But notice, key, that that's a uniface. Oh, and one thing, if you could go back a slide, I forgot to mention, notice that in this plate, this is where the piece appears, he only shows one side of it. He mentions that there's a cross on the other side, but notice he only shows one side of the piece. Okay, sorry. So here we only have one side again. I don't know what this thing is here. Maybe that is a countermark of some sort, but on the Gutag piece you can see it's uniface. Okay, go ahead to the next one, please. So now we get to Prado. This is where we start to get into the meat of the issue. And as I say, Prado mentions all of the previous descriptions of it in pretty good detail. He really doesn't leave out too much. And if you read what he says, even though it says miscellaneous pieces of doubtful classification, he doesn't outright say that this is a fake. But then, as I say, he also puts it on a plate in his book where it says doubtful and bogus pieces at the bottom. So clearly he did not feel like this was a legitimate piece. And if you look at the other pieces in this plate, that's a known fake of a clipe. He was definitely putting it in the category of fakes. Next slide, please, HD. And then, again, we'll gloss through this because this is another one of the references that doesn't really go anywhere with it. But one thing I thought I'd mention in Borcio, as you see here, even though the two listings, sorry, got a little blurry on my scanner, he doesn't give the weights, which is unfortunate, but I think that what he's trying to say here is you have a larger coin and a smaller coin, which is interesting because some of the previous references did mention that the ANS collection has a 4 reales. They were considering that the larger coin is an 8 reales, even though the weight is of a 10. They considered a peso weight, an 8 reales weight, whereas there was an existence of a 4 reales. And I think that's what Burcio was trying to show here. But again, we don't see the other side, so we don't know, and he doesn't even say whether it's uniface there. Next slide, please. So here's where the whole train comes off the tracks when Grove mentions outright the 1611 uniface bar-tip cross REI was made to defraud collectors. Well, that's nice, but he didn't mention whether the non-uniface is genuine, or he didn't mention even the existence of such a thing. So we're still kind of left to wonder, is there a genuine piece or not? And also, when were these made to defraud collectors, and how does he know that? There's a lack of information here that's unfortunate, but is very strongly worded. Let's see what the next one is. I've forgotten now. Oh, so I wanted to point out here, unfortunately, the Mantis system at ANS does not show a picture of this piece, and you kind of have to know how to go about it to find it. But earlier today, I found the actual listing, which is for this, the 4 reales size piece in the ANS collection. And you'll notice that they do say, under notes, fantasy. So again, we have no clear answers there as well. One more slide. I think this is the last one. So this is what we're left with. Because this goes all the way back to 1854, it's probably unlikely that this is a total fraud and that there probably is something genuine. We just don't have any mention, or we don't have any photos of the genuine to look at. I will take the time at some point to see what ANS has, but again, they don't think it's genuine. So maybe theirs is not one of the genuine ones, if a genuine exists. But there's clear evidence that there was something called a peso de minas and rescate. That's a documentary from the 1600s. Again, the pieces that we've been seeing don't have an R mark for rescate, and they don't have anything on the other side. They're all uniface. But the doubt about the legitimacy of the piece goes almost all the way back to when it first came to light. 1866 is where we see Sumamente Extraño. Now, something I hadn't mentioned before, besides the ANS specimen, is that there are reports going way back of a specimen in the A.H. Baldwin cabinet in London. Again, I would like to see that piece, but somewhere in the literature you'll see that it mentions also the cross on the reverse. So it could be that that is one of the original pieces that Orozco Iberra was talking about. Several auctions have these pieces too. Again, like I say, we've had one, but uniface. I've never seen one in any auction with the design on the other side. All that said, even if the pieces that are uniface that we have questioned about, if these are all illegitimate, then why are they all the same weight? Why are they all made the same way? If you look at the piece that I passed around the room, you'll notice that it is cast, which was what was said from the beginning, that these were cast pieces, and it's uniface, but you'll notice that the edges were cut. And to me, it also looks like the uniface side was filed down. So somebody was trying to make these to an exact weight and was also trying to keep within all the parameters. Doesn't mean that it's impossible, but what I pointed out on the first slide was that all those parameters were given back in 1854. If somebody were so inclined, all they had to do was follow that roadmap and they could make their own piece. And that could be what happened. Obviously, we saw what Prado and Grove had to say. What I would like to do, and I just haven't had a chance because I literally put this together on the flight over here, I would like to do an XRF analysis of the piece that I passed around the room and any others I can find. I think it's kind of the start of something where we could finally come to some good conclusions about it. It's just amazing to me in 150 years, the best that we've been able to come up with is doubtful, seems strange, whatever, but nothing in basically all stopping short of a full condemnation. So I hope that you've all taken a look at the coin. If you have questions, I'm ready to answer.
And we have an XRF down our table if you want to use it.
Perfect. I was hoping you would. Let's do it. Yeah, John.
Just something general, though. Obviously, they extracted ore at the mines. Did they also do refining at the mines?
Well, somewhere I read in one of these references that there was even talk about making these out of lead, but one of the things I read was the point behind, probably the point behind its being a 10 Raleigh size was that it wasn't refined yet, and it wasn't purified, and so there must have been some kind of extrapolation there.
They had to turn it from ore to smelt it somehow to get it into.
Yeah, but I think it just wasn't in final form. But again, that we're assuming that this was a legitimate thing in the beginning. Well, what I think that XRF will show us is if there are trace elements that could not have existed in the 1600s. That's what we're after on that. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
What is your feeling on it? Like, what do you think?
Well, I knew somebody would ask me that, and the fact that the first slide I showed you was an example of this in my auction kind of tells you I really don't have any interest in condemning this piece. But, you know, like any of us, I would rather get to the truth of the matter and find out. And I think you've probably gotten the drift from this whole presentation that I think that there probably was something legitimate originally, and it's kind of been bastardized since then. And what we're seeing now are all illegitimate pieces. Terry?
Do you know the source of the piece that's in the ANS collection?
I don't, no.
Yeah, sometimes you can tell from the record.
It's true, but it goes back pretty far because it is mentioned very early on in the references, as is the Baldwin piece, too. And I don't know what happened to the Baldwin piece. And like I said, I wish I'd had more time to research the Schulman catalogs because that might have provided more of an answer, too. Yes, sir, Mike.
I'm nowhere near the expert that you are on this stuff, but I just look at that picture, and the style doesn't look like anything that comes out of the 1600s. The lettering, the way it's made, it just looks totally much more recent than that.
There's no doubt that it was a fantasy on some level. Obviously, it was not made at the Mexico Mint. In fact, HT, if you want to go all the way to the back, then we can kind of see it on the screen as opposed to, yeah, see if you can go. Yeah, keep going all the way back to, because probably, well, no, let's go forward to one more. That. This is a rubbing, so, you know, it's going to be crude. But if you saw the piece going around the room, yes, the lettering is crude. But they did put a Mexico City Mint mark on there, so that was supposed to be the legitimacy of it. But I agree, it doesn't have the flavor of that.
The style of letters, the style just doesn't match anything you're doing.
As I say, I think that there was something, based on the documents, there was something at the mints, at the mines being used as a token. And I think that the author in 1854 made the connection that that's what this was, and it went from there. That's it. That's all we know, I guess.
So, they mentioned the previous use of an R
Right.
on earlier types of
Right.
these tokens, but we haven't seen anything.
No, I haven't seen anything like that either. No, the documentation from the 1600s says that there was something called rescate that they marked with an R. And that's why I say I think that there actually were mine tokens that were made. And, you know, it's funny that whoever made this, if we're going to say that that's a more modern fraud, say it was made in the 1800s, why didn't they take the next step to put an R on there? That would have been pretty simple, wouldn't it? Well, there was a little bit of a controversy. Something I'm not telling you is that the documentation that we're talking about comes from 1604. So if you did that, then that kind of would have post-dated something that would have happened earlier. That makes a problem. But the other thing, and again, I just didn't have the room to show the entire 3-page footnote about the documentation on it. But there was also evidence that they were recalled and shouldn't exist. If somebody made this as a fraud in the 1800s, why did they put 1611 on it? That is the big question, because there's nothing in the documentation that states 1611. So it's pretty mysterious, and it's not to say that people couldn't do whatever they wanted to do, but you always kind of ask yourself why.
It wouldn't be, let's say it's from around its contemporary, roughly with the source, it's not impossible that they would make it from, if they were making it to defraud people, they might very well look at a piece, which they could probably get access to of that vintage, and they could copy those letters. I mean, they're able to manufacture this.
Well, again, it's the question
It's
is
not
why.
a copy. It doesn't look like a copy
Right.
of anything.
No, but keep in mind that and I suspect that there's something prior to this 1854 that we're not seeing, and that just didn't have any pictures. But he describes pretty well exactly what the piece is. He gives you the weight, he gives you the design, he gives you the shape, that it's a roughly an octagon. So you have all the elements you need. But like I say, we just don't have any kind of the next link back, and that's another thing to look for too. If we could find that, that might answer some things.
I gotta think, if such a piece surfaces today, there's a vast collector market for such a thing. But in 1854, how many people were out there eagerly buying something like that?
No, but clearly it was around then, so. Making a noise. So any other questions? Did everyone get to see the piece that I passed around? Okay. Well, enjoy it. And if you want to see any more of see any of the slides again, we can do that. But I had fun going through it. Like I said, it wasn't something I expected to do, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that nobody's really. $325. Yeah. No, it wasn't, and it was a situation where I didn't have the time to do like I did now, to go through all this, or else I might have said, no, I probably shouldn't run that. But also it came from a legitimate consignor who's a well-known collector, and he stands behind it and believes in it. You know.
Did he talk to you about where it came from into his collection?
No, but you know, now, going through this, I'm not really dismayed about it because I can establish that this was at least around in 1854. So originally, before I even had that, and I saw this in Prado or one of those, I said, oh, this is a fake. Why would anyone ever have that? But going back to 1854, that's more than just a fake. That's an old classic piece. It's not just, and it's also not a reproduction of an actual piece. This is something that stands on its own, whether it's made in 1611 or later. And you know, there's always also the possibility that the 1611 has nothing to do with when the piece was made. That may not be a date. You know, maybe it's a weight or something like that, or a fineness marking of some form. Maybe if it's even upside down, maybe it's supposed to be 1191 instead of 1611. Nope, we don't really know. This one.
What kind of documentation is there that it had anything to do with mines?
Well, the documentation comes from here, like I say, in the footnote, and you can see the number 1 after rescate. And the footnote makes it clear that there were pieces being made in the mines and being used by the miners for their transactions. Now, I think the rest of it is what he has brought up here is a description of just this piece, and not of what was actually being used in the mines, necessarily. And this piece, I presume, is the one that he's referring to when he says it was found in the city on Santa Teresa Street. So he kind of maybe made the connection between the two without any basis.
So it was found on the street, like in
In
the
an excavation.
1800s? Or-
I assume so, yeah. He doesn't say when, but I assume because this was an 1850s reference that's when it was found.
Okay,
Yeah.
and yet it was theoretically made like in the 1600s?
Yeah, I mean, because that's the documentation that they found, was that these things were used in the mines in the 1600s. What I'm saying is that the leap of logic may be that this piece is actually that. Even though he freely admits that they were marked with an R, or they should have been marked with an R, and in the footnote he mentions why, that they were not to be used outside the mines and so forth. Now, why he would have made that connection on a piece that doesn't show an R, that makes you wonder, doesn't it? But we also don't know what the REI means on the coin too, and perhaps they thought that R was that REI was the R that they were looking for. We also have no confidence that it was made in Mexico City, or that there should have been a Mexico City mint mark on there. That doesn't make much sense either. But there it is on the piece.
Also, tokens tend to be made from base metals, not precious metals.
Yeah, and so far as I can tell, we'll confirm it with XRF. This is good silver, but we'll see.
But Dan, you agree this may have nothing to do with that?
What do you mean?
Well, that's got L on the reverse, right?
We don't know because this rubbing does not show the other side.
But he describes it pretty accurately.
Yes, that's true. Yes, you're right. You're right. That's true. And no, I'm sorry, you're right. And what I was getting at is that my feeling is that when this publication came out, somebody saw this and said, well, I'll just keep making these and it's pretty easy to make. Or maybe they even had the piece. But they figured, we don't know what the cross looks like on the other side, so we're not going to bother with that because then somebody will see. But you would think that somebody would read this and see that there was supposed to be a design on the other side. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, none of it makes sense, honestly. Okay. Any other questions? If not, we'll wrap it up. Very good. Thanks.